Hello, and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efrain Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the great and distinguished honor of having with me Dr. Frederick Buskey, and we are going to talk about his book, A School Leader's Guide to Reclaiming Purpose. This book, published in 2024, offers a practical roadmap for school leaders seeking to shift from reactive, urgency driven approach to a more strategic and purposeful leadership style. Drawing on over 3 decades of experience in K 12 and higher education, Buskey provides simple frameworks and actionable tools designed to help leaders make incremental improvements and focus on what truly matters, supporting and growing the staff. For more information and to purchase the book, A School Leader's Guide to Reclaiming Purpose, the link is down there. Click on it or simply Google it and you will find it. Dr. Buskey, how are you?
Efrain, I'm doing great. I'm so glad to be here with you on this sunny Sunday morning.
Beautiful. It must feel amazing to publish a book. Can you tell us about how it feels?
Yeah, we were talking about that on the pre-show. It's kind of an interesting feeling because it's something that you're actively working on for 2 years for me, coming forward and until it's published, and then afterwards, all of a sudden, you have this thing. But I think the thing that's really brought me the most joy is being able to take a hard copy of the book and hand it to somebody, or put it in the mail and feel like you're giving something that's valuable to somebody. It's called a guide on purpose, so it's something to help take people from one place to another. And so the joy that comes with being able to hand that to somebody and say, "Here, I think this will be valuable to you." That's been the thing that's really special.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, Frederick, tell us what inspired you to write this guide and what problem you were aiming to address.
Ephraim, this wasn't the book I wanted to write. The book I really wanted to write was about taking a systems approach for school leaders to create a school that is centered around growing and supporting teachers. So I have a whole methodology around that. And I would be out working with assistant principals, training, doing workshops and things, and we'd be doing that and we'd be building skills, but there were these points where their eyes would just start to glaze over, not because I was teaching complicated techniques, but because they couldn't see themselves actually being able to get in to have the time to execute those techniques. Even things as simple as doing 5 minutes of coaching every day, right? Just one teacher, 5 minutes. They couldn't do it. And so what I realized was the gap between where they are to the gap to actually just being able to give the time and attention to what I was really preaching at that point. I had to do something to fill in that gap. Can I tell the origin story of what?
Absolutely. Please.
So when I was back in Clemson University, I think it was the spring of 2018, I drove up to this small rural elementary school in South Carolina. It's an April morning. I get out of the car. It's already 90 degrees, but I put my coat on. I go in the building. I had a student principal licensure intern there. So I check in with her, and then I go to check in with the assistant principal. I walk into her office, open the door, and when you walk into somebody's office and you know right away like, something's wrong. I mean, her hair is out of place. Her cheeks are flushed. She's got papers all over her desk. And I said, "Kelly, what's wrong?" And she holds up this stack of yellow slips. She says, "It's 10 in the morning. I have 7 office referrals. Every one of these referrals is going to take me 45 minutes. My day's already over. I was going to go work with teachers. I was going to do observations. I'm done." And she was almost crying. And I thought for a minute, and I said, "Kelly, of those 7 office referrals, how many of those are more about the teacher than they are about the kid?" She paused and she said 5. 5 out of 7 office referrals were about teachers, not kids. I went back in my car and I just sat there for a while because this just hit me as such a tragedy. I mean, Kelly was a young assistant principal, ambitious, smart. She knew instructional leadership. She knew that she was trapped on this treadmill, right? She got it. 5 of those referrals shouldn't be there. If she could work with those teachers, then she would cut those referrals, but she couldn't see the way to get to that place. So as I was writing the book, and for really since 2018, that just inspired me so much. And I was writing the book, I kept thinking about Kelly. I kept thinking about a lot of other assistant principals that I've worked with, that I've mentored, and thought, okay, I need to take you from this place of being reactive to being intentional. And I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but to me, the U-turn, the U-turn is understanding that we have to stop managing time. We have to start managing priorities.
Amen. Wow, that's such a powerful statement, because one becomes a principal, a school leader, and you have in your imagination how it's going to be. You have a thinking of you're going to do it better than all your principals before, right? You're going to be the star, and all of a sudden you face the reality and you realize, oh, that's why it was so difficult for my principals and my leaders. So what to do about it? And here you come out of like, I want to support the people and let me write this guide. um what would you say? Can you tell us about your journey, your professional journey, and what got you to this level?
Wow, that's a great question. I I began when I was finishing my undergraduate in college. I actually wanted to be a major college football coach, and somewhere along the way, a couple things happened. One is, I was physical education. I was a football player and wanted to go coach football. And one of my professors said, as a PE teacher, as a coach, you can impact 15, 30, maybe 60 kids in a football program. But if you're a PE teacher, in many schools, you will impact every single kid in that school. And that stuck with me. And so through some other life events, I decided that major college football was not the thing I wanted to do, and went into teaching. And I love physical education. I love teaching that, but this may shock some of your younger listeners. Back in the 1990s, you could not get a job as a physical education teacher unless you were the head football or head basketball coach. There were no teaching jobs. So I moved into special education and then later into middle school. And I was blessed to be part of a really high performing middle school team. We taught 8th grade. We did big interdisciplinary thematic units. So we had our science teacher, reading, language arts, special education, myself, and doing social studies. And we all worked together and we built these amazing units. But what happened in the school was that the things that we were doing was kind of stressing the structures of the school. Because if you're going to do really creative work, you have to meet together. If you're going to do cool things with kids, you need a schedule that's flexible. And a lot of the teachers in the building weren't really comfortable with that. So we started to get this kind of schism in the school. And that's when I started to move, I think, from my teaching to really thinking about organizational leadership, right? What's happening in this school, and what should be there to fix it? How do we do that? And I remember having this conversation with my principal and saying, look, what's your vision for this school? Because we had this 8th grade team, kicking out the barn doors. We had a 7th grade team that was really entrenched in traditional junior high practices and didn't want to go anywhere. And then we had a 6th grade team that was in mayhem because they were all conflicted. And I said, "What's your vision?" And he said, "I don't go for that vision thing." And I knew, I walked out of that office and I knew, I just said, "I'm done," which was sad because I felt like I was spending more time fighting the system to be able to do what we wanted to do, as opposed to actually focusing on the work with kids. And so that's what inspired my journey into leadership. I got my mentor, who was in the county next door, hired me to move into a county office and coordinate special education services, but he also was a big supporter in helping me go get my doctorate. And I got that in organizational change and leadership. And yeah, and then moved into higher ed, worked with principals for 13 years, did the principal training programs. And then I had great experiences when I was at Clemson, and I was part of a rural superintendent's cooperative. So I was going to these superintendent's meetings every month of these rural principals, and I fell in love with rural education, and became just so much more sensitized. I think one of the things, if we're lucky as we get older, is we move from focusing on how much we know to how much we don't know. And I just learned there's so much I don't know. And so just listening to leaders and working with leaders made me want to invest more time in classrooms and serving them rather than writing papers for journals and things like that. Long-winded
Beautiful. I
answer.
mean, you absolutely. When you are reading the book, you feel that you are listening to someone who's guiding you through the journey, and I believe that perhaps that influence of coaching so many aspiring principals and going to those meetings and that access to academia is makes you an ideal person to be this guide. Thank you so much, Frederick. So in the book, urgency versus strategy, you talk about the difference between the urgent type of leadership and the strategic leadership. Can you explain these concepts and why transitioning from one to the other is so important for school leaders?
Yeah. So urgent leader, I think, is demonstrated by where Kelly was. And again, that's what kind of inspired the framework. But urgent leaders are focused on tasks, right? We walk into school in the morning and we know we got all this stuff to do. So we focus on tasks. Because we're so task focused and because there's so much to do, we get in this mindset of just knocking stuff out and reacting. And when we're reacting, we wind up spending a lot of time treating symptoms. And from symptoms, then we get trapped also into this idea of action, right? As long as I'm taking care of some kind of thing and I'm moving and I'm working on it, then I'm making progress. So the difference then in strategic leaders is strategic leaders begin with people. They put people first, and they prioritize work with people instead of prioritizing urgency. That allows them to also slow down and look at root problems. So instead of just reacting and addressing a behavior with a student, and a strategic leader is going to pause and think about the root problem. The strategic leader is going to think, hey, 5 of 7 of these referrals are about teachers, right? So there's an underlying problem. So if I don't get to that underlying problem, I'm going to be repeating this over and over again. And then one of the things I really tried to drive home in the model is that this is really about incremental change. There are no promises. If you follow this guide, I do not promise that you can walk in as a school leader and have a cup of coffee and read the newspaper and then be in classrooms all day. That's not going to happen. What we want to do is make things a little bit better every day. So I emphasize techniques that can bring incremental progress. My goal with school leaders is to give you, with this book, to give you 5 minutes a day, which may not sound like a lot, but there are techniques in the book of how you leverage 5 minutes a day with a teacher. If you could spend 5 minutes a day with one teacher for 3 weeks, that teacher will be better. And if you choose the right teacher, you're going to get one less referral maybe in that 3-week period. And you know what? That just gave you back 45 minutes. So that's
Amen.
kind of the whole idea, the contrast between urgent and strategic leadership. It's again, what's urgent, reaction, versus being intentional about your priorities and what's most important.
Yes. I appreciate that emphasis in the adults that you lead, because often it definitely happened to me and the people that I mentor, it always happens to them that you become a school leader because at some point you decided to become an educator to make that a difference in the life of children. But when you become a school leader, you're the coach of the team. So you cannot be concerned about the people sitting on the stands. You have to be concerned about the players in the team. That has to be your north. In other words, you love the student by loving the teacher. And when I say loving, mean by providing them the support that they need to be the most successful that they can be.
You're so right. And I try to distill things down into really simple ideas. And so that first one is, as a principal, we know you have three priorities, right? Keep everybody safe, meet all your legal requirements so you don't get shut down. And then the third one is to improve outcomes for kids. But we don't teach kids. So who teaches kids? Teachers. So keep everybody safe, meet your legal responsibilities, and grow and support your teachers. Because if your teachers, if at the end of this year, if your teachers were 15% better than they were at the beginning of the year, you probably had a pretty good school year, right? I mean, yeah.
Amen. You got it. So in the book, you provide 6 stages to move from urgent to strategic leadership. Can you briefly walk us through these stages and highlight which stage you find the most challenging for leaders to master?
So the first stage is just awareness. You talked about the journey when you become a principal and you're going to do all these things, and that's really the way I imagine this, right? And I use the metaphor simile Apollo 13, the Apollo 13 mission, when the rocket went into the moon. They had a problem with the rocket on the return, and so they had to do all these things in order to get back to where they wanted to go. So I've always thought about, we start our leadership journey in one place and we're trying to get to this other planet, which is the purpose driven planet, right? Helping kids, working with teachers. And so we blast off to that, but we get pulled by the gravitational pull of something else. And that something else is the big ball of urgency. So instead of going straight to our purpose, we get pulled into urgency. And it has this amazing pull that just keeps us sucked in there. So how do we get out? And that's where the 6 stages come in. So the first stage is awareness, simply becoming aware that what this urgency is, that I'm looking at tasks, I'm treating symptoms, I'm driven by urgency, and I'm more focused on action than on progress. Once I become aware of that, then I can make what I call the U-turn. And I think that's the most important part because it's the part that kind of triggers everything else. The U-turn is this: stop trying to manage time and start managing your priorities. Like that's a twist. If you can do that, then you are on your way. And you don't, the rest of it will help you, but that alone will start to make a difference. And I want to spend more time on this one. I want to invest more time on this one. So there's these things I call the 3 epiphanies that I stole from other people, put them together over time. The first epiphany is you can't do everything. All right, we have to accept that. And if you're a leader that says, yeah, I get everything done at the end of every day, I got to push back, because how much time did you spend with your new early career teachers each day coaching them? Because they could be coached every single day, right? You can't do everything. Now, once you accept that you can't do everything, here's what this does. It means that you get to choose what gets done and what doesn't get done. And that is so important, because when we're in the task mentality and when we're reacting to urgency and we're treating symptoms, we are not intentional about choosing what does not get done. We choose what we're going to do, but we don't think about the things that we're not doing. There are so many things I think leaders do every day that aren't as important as checking in with that first year teacher in the third week of school, or checking in with that first year teacher every day during the first 3 weeks of school. And so that second epiphany is that I get to choose what gets done and doesn't get done. And then the third one I find actually the kind of the most challenging and sometimes painful, and that is that your choices reflect your values.
Hmm.
So if I say I can't do this because I'm too busy putting together the parent newsletter for the week, or I put together this bulletin board, or I have this report and I want to make sure that it's absolutely perfect so I can't get in my teacher's classroom. There's nothing wrong with those choices, but they're reflecting a value that says my teacher is not the most important thing, right? This kind of work is more important. So I think when we make that link of not being able to do everything and realizing then that we can actually choose, and then that our choices reflect our values, I- that to me is a big pivot.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, I think a big mistake of graduate schools of education. I don't know if it's still like that. Um, we read all these business books, right? Because the truth is that so much strategy from business can be applied to the field of school leadership. However, the approach is so distinct because you're dealing in a different ball game, right? It's not a private company where you can tell someone you're fired, right? You have contracts, you have unions, you have policies, you have so many things that you have to manage. And I think that this idea of the hustle, you have to be this person that has to end the day with inbox zero and all this, and you forget, right? For example, checking in with that first year teacher those first 3 weeks, something that perhaps you don't have to do in the private industry. And that's why we need books like yours that really illuminates, yes, you can aspire to be from good to great, right? But you have to check in with that teacher and empathize with them and provide them support, and perhaps leave that newsletter for later, because that one-on-one attention is necessary with that teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. Or find somebody else that can do that newsletter. I will put in a plug. Actually, Good to Great is one of the 5 books I have on my shelf there, and I have found so much inspiration, and people who know that book will find things in this book that are inspired by that. So for people who want a light summer read,
Yeah,
Good to Great would be a good one, and the
it's
audiobook's
a
really high
wonderful
quality.
book.
Yeah,
Absolutely. However, right, we
yeah,
have
yeah,
to adapt it to
and
the reality of schools.
yeah, I think one of the big ideas that it doesn't come through in this book because it's really the second book, but when we think about schools as organizations, right? We have people, we have purpose, we have structures and resources. So I think about it as kind of a pyramid with these 4 points. And having your school aligned so that all these pieces are working together is really hard. And we all know what misalignment feels like, right? Just for example, kids need to take this test that isn't really developmentally appropriate. So now we're trying to do all this stuff that doesn't relate to the real work of improving kids, or all of the requirements that teachers have to do documentation and all this other stuff that takes them away from actually planning their lessons and focusing on kids. The more that we can align our school, the more we can be clear on our purpose about why teachers are there, why teachers are doing their work. The more we can be clear on that purpose, we can align the structures, the physical structures, but also the legal structures, and then the intangible structures of our expectations and the stories that we tell. And then we can align the resources, the fiscal resources, but also Ephraim, the two most important resources we have are time and attention. So if
Mm.
we can bring all those things into alignment to support the work of teachers, what we do is we create a system that makes it easier for teachers to do their job. And that's, I talk about always supporting and growing teachers. And that's what supporting teachers is. Supporting teachers is bringing your school into alignment that makes it easier for teachers to be great teachers. And then growing teachers is focusing actually on the person, not the school. And when we think about teachers, right, I think about four pieces: knowledge, skills, dispositions, and health.
Mm.
So that's where we want to get to. That's what strategic leadership is all about. If I'm a strategic leadership, I am focused on supporting my teachers by aligning the systems and the things in our school. And I'm focused on my teachers by helping them grow in either knowledge, skills, dispositions, or health. Like, that's strategic leadership.
Beautiful. So
That's the second book.
that's coming soon. What are in addition to that principle dealing with the seven referrals? What are other common pitfalls or obstacles that school leaders often encounter when we are trying to shift from that urgency approach to the strategic one?
Yeah, that's a great question. It takes us back to step three. I think I got through the first two steps, right? Which is awareness and then the U-turn. The next two steps are directly about those pitfalls. One is powering down and the other is powering up. So once I realize that I have choices and that I want to be truer to my values, I have to figure out ways to do less so that I can do the work that's more important. And so, how do I avoid getting out of doing that newsletter? How to avoid spending so much time on a report that is required but may not be that important? How do I streamline my processes? So powering down, there are techniques for not taking on things, especially not taking things on that aren't core to your responsibility and your mission. And of course, we can't say no to everything, but if we can say no to enough things, again, that we win 5 minutes a day, that's enough in the beginning. So learning to say no, learning to avoid work. And then the next step, powering up, is starting to build systems, to build structures, to train people to help them also focus on priorities instead of urgency, to help them be more intentional, them be more thoughtful, for them to begin thinking the same way you're thinking. Because as long as they're not, they're looking at you and saying, okay, let's get this urgent stuff done. And you're saying, wait, we need to be more strategic. They don't get that. So the book helps you use some language and start to build some systems and procedures in that help move other people into that space. So now you're doing less. Now you have people around you that are also thinking about what's important versus what's urgent. And you build some systems to help them be more effective at what they're doing. And you've saved 5 minutes a day. And that takes you to step five, which is about leveraging how you leverage really small units of time to make a really big difference in people's lives, but also, in their teaching profession. So I go over a technique I call 5-minute coaching, which is a really simple but super powerful way that we can take 5 minutes in a day and do a mini coaching session with the teacher that over time will help them grow into a more reflective practitioner, so that over time, teachers begin coaching themselves. So that's 5. And then 6 is moving into that strategic leadership phase, where throughout my day, I'm pausing. When stuff happens, the first thing I do is I stop. And the first thing I ask myself is, what's the problem? Right. And so that, again, it helps me be intentional. It helps me start focusing on what the underlying causes are, so I'm not back dealing with the same problem over and over and over again.
I appreciate that in your book there are numerous ways in which a principal can stop doing everything, right, and start delegating, start saying how to say no and the reasons why, which is often not learned until you are in the game. So I appreciate this guy, but before we continue, let's celebrate the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
So, you were going to say something?
Yeah. I want to tell a story about leaders
Tell us.
delegating. So I just came back from investing. See, it's intentional, right? Language is so
Good
powerful
word.
because we talk about
Absolutely.
spending time. I went out for 3 weeks in California to invest time with my mom. She's 91. So no matter how well she does, our time together is limited. And so I always try to think about investing time with people instead of spending time. Like spending time is sitting in a meeting, right? But investing time is actually could be helping people grow, but in our personal lives, it's also about making memories. So I was really intentional about making memories with my mom these last 3 weeks. But she lives in a little studio apartment and it looks out into the backyard. And she loves looking out. She loves the garden. It's the same house my grandfather was in, she was born in, and the garden had always been great when he was alive. But it's she has trouble keeping it up. So it's just a mess. And so while we were there, we started helping clean up the garden, just a couple spots, right? You can't do the whole thing. So we'd be intentional about really choosing the places that she can see out the window and focusing on those. But I love my mom, but she wants to be able to do it herself. And because she can't do it herself, if somebody else tries to do it, she micromanages them. So it's I want this, I want this, I want this. And so it's really hard to serve her. And I finally had to have the conversation with her, right? Mom, you can't do this. You need to let it go. And it's not going to get done exactly the way you want. But guess what? It's going to get done. And it's going to be better than if nobody had done anything. And I think that's a challenge of leadership, right? Because if there's a report, and I know you have the ability to write the report, and I give that to you, you are not going to write that report the way I would write the report. You are not going to do the parent newsletter the way I would do the parent newsletter. And what I have to learn to do is to be able to say, okay, Ephraim's going to do it different. It it's not going to be what I would do, but you know what? I have to trust him. And it's not that big a deal. We we visited the bristlecone pine trees on this trip. If people are ever in the eastern Sierra Nevada in California, there's bristlecone. It's an Inyo National Forest. There's the bristlecone pine trees. These trees live to over 4,000 years old. And they're incredible when you're close to them. They just have this majesty that I can't even describe it. 4,000 years old. We don't mean anything to those trees. We are the if they had eyes, we would be the blink of the eye, right? We're the growth of a tiny root to those trees. We don't matter. And I find in their presence that to be a humbling but a positive experience. Like all this stuff that we get bent out of shape about doesn't matter. That typo in your parent newsletter, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. And I think if we can, as leaders, realize again what's really important, what's my purpose, and if my purpose is to support and grow teachers, then all of a sudden there's a lot of stuff that I spend time on that isn't that big a deal. And I need to let that go. I need to let other people help me. Or sometimes giving something a C is okay. And I need to invest time with people instead of spending time on these tasks.
Beautiful, great examples. I appreciate the numerous examples. Can you mention one example or a case study that you cited where school leaders successfully reclaimed their purpose and the positive outcomes they followed?
I think the person that I didn't help him get there, but he was there and he's inspired me because he's like the opposite of where Kelly is. So there's a really legendary principal in the upstate and rural South Carolina, Barry Jacks, who's gone to multiple schools and he's kind of got the reputation of a turnaround principal. And He's great at organization. He's great at using data and having conversations around data. But what he really does is be hands-on with teachers and be in his school and work with them. Like I learned in working with Barry, he was a mentor to another school leader in a program that I was working with when we were at Clemson. And what I discovered really quickly was if I wanted to get a message to him, if I needed something from him, I had to call him because he did not respond to email. Now, this may be hard for a lot of administrators to comprehend, and certainly probably most of you in your districts cannot ignore email, but Barry does not do email. And when I went, so I learned to call him. And when I went to visit him in his school, I walked in and the front office person's like, "Oh, yeah, Mr. Jax isn't in his office. I know you have an appointment. Let me call him on his walkie talkie." She goes to pick up the walkie talkie and she realizes he doesn't have his walkie talkie with him. I think I know. I think we can find him. So we walk this school, and sure enough, he's coming out of a classroom, and I get there, and he's like, "Oh, Frederick, I got to show you something. You got to see what's going on in this classroom." And he grabs me and he takes me down, and we go in this classroom and we watch something, and then he takes me in another classroom, and then we go out, and then he talks about the teacher and the conversations and the work that he's done with that teacher because where she was, kind of underperforming a year ago, and then how he had conversations with her and helped her kind of turn around because it's a teacher who was coasting. She'd been beaten up. She was tired, right? That happens. And her fire started to go out. And so he went in and started working with her and helped her reclaim her purpose. The thing that made him a great principal was that he was present and he was focused on teacher growth. And there were teachers that did not want to work for him because you were going to grow if you were working for him. Um, and I just think about his ability to filter out all the stuff and delegate. And he had good assistant principals. He had good people in the office staff. They could run the school while he was growing teachers. That's an extreme, right? And a lot of people you're never going to be in the situation where you actually do that. But we have to be able to get out into schools more. And there are principals that are in their classrooms, right? That's the thing. There are principals who invest a lot of time in classrooms. I've worked with assistant principals who made that transition from being in the office, checking emails, disciplining students to being out in classrooms with teachers. Can I tell one more story?
Absolutely. This is your show.
So this actually happened when I was doing the principal licensure program at Western Carolina University. And one of the big things that I actually taught in the classes was the importance of being present. We used Jerry Starrett's Ethical Leadership book, which is a wonderful kind of exposition on what's important with leaders. And so I had this assignment where I told people, like, for 1 week, be super present. Like, don't get off your email, get off all that stuff. Just really focus on being present with people. So when you're with somebody, you're not thinking about all those other things. You're not halfway sitting in your desk. You're really focused. And this assistant principal intern wrote me about one of his experiences. He said, I was doing morning lunch duty, right? So he's getting ready to walk down to the cafeteria for morning lunch duty. He picks up his computer so he can check his email while he's doing supervision, which is what he always does. And he said, "No, I have this silly assignment from this class that I need to be present." So he was intentional. That's key. He made an intentional choice about whether to engage with email or not. Put his computer down, walks into the cafeteria, starts greeting kids, greeting teachers, staff comes in. One of the paraprofessionals walks in. He says, "Hey, how are you this morning?" She goes, "Oh, I'm fine." And just something in her affect told him that she wasn't fine. And she sits down and he goes over to her and he sits down and he says, like, "What's going on? How are you? What's happening?" And so she starts to talk about her dad. Her dad is dying and how much, time she's spending with him in the hospital, and just the pain and the grief and the physical and emotional toll it's taking on her. And this whole time, there's a little second grader sitting right by her. And when she's done talking, the second grader climbs into her lap and gives her a hug. Right? That's people-focused leadership. And you can imagine being in a school when you walk in and people ask, "How are you?" and they actually really want to know the answer. And it's important, and we take care of each other. And I think that's that people-centered school. And yeah, that's the story I think is so
I love it.
powerful.
It reminds me, Simon Sinek said that he interviewed some sort of general, and he asked the general, what makes a great leader? And he said, well, a great leader, when they ask, how are you doing, is because they really care
Mm,
on how you're doing, not just to say it. So it just with those simple things, that incremental compound interest expands to a level that makes great principles like that one that you mentioned. Thank you, Frederick. What advice do you have for new or aspiring leaders? And I know this is your jam because you have supported principals and assistant principals for a long time. When they are beginning their journey, and they definitely will feel overwhelmed by the urgent demands and their role.
I think that one of the big things is to realize that the biggest value you can bring is not doing something for somebody. It is providing them with your total time and attention. Even again for 5 minutes. If I come in and, Ephraim, we're together, instead of me asking, what can I do for you? And then you telling me as a teacher what you need, and then I run around trying to do that stuff, I haven't helped grow you. So the biggest thing that I can do is to ask you reflective questions and then shut my mouth and provide the space. I think we expect leaders to have answers, and that's the wrong approach. Great leaders don't have answers. Great leaders ask great questions, because it's the teachers that have the answers. So I teach this process of 5-minute coaching. If you're going to do nothing else as an assistant principal, if you take nothing else away from this, just take this 5-minute coaching. You get with the teacher and you just say, hey, tell me in your last lesson, or tell me for the day or for this semester, what went well. And just be quiet, and you don't react. You can smile, you can nod. What went well? Were there any surprises? Is there anything that you would do differently? You just ask those 3 questions and you just listen. It takes 2 minutes to 5 minutes to do that. If you do that consistently, what will happen is people will begin asking those questions of themselves, or they will see you coming and they know you're going to ask those questions. So they begin thinking. And now what you've done is you've helped your teachers to become reflective practitioners. Now your teachers, even when you're not there, are thinking at the end of the day, what went well today? Where did I have any surprises? Is there anything I would do differently? And that's that idea of compounding interest, right? Because you've invested 5 minutes with the teacher consistently over time. And now that investment is paying off because they're becoming more reflective practitioners. And they know that you value them, because me asking you a question and then shutting up, like you've done this whole interview, right? You've just asked me questions and then let me go. And I feel so valued and so important because you're listening. And that's the key. Ask good questions and then just listen. Don't listen to respond, just listen to learn. And if you do that, you create space for people. They know that you care.
Yeah, that took me a long time as a school leader to not listen to respond,
Mm.
because I think it's the arrogance that you bring to the school leader. You think, oh, you have to be the best teacher. So every time you say something and they tell you, you listen, check, and but let me tell you what I think, right? And that is such an erroneous way to lead a school. And often my philosophy is that the best teacher is when we are all together, right?
Hmm.
We all
Hmm.
collect our voices, our strengths, and even our weaknesses, because that's part of the humanity of school leadership. Uh, Frederick, how can school leaders progress this this shifting from urgent to strategic leadership? Let's say that they pick your book, they realize, oh wow, I'm being this urgent person, I'm gonna become more strategic. How can they progress monitor their own milestones?
Wow. I think this is one of those things where you never get to the end of the journey. I mean, it's written in 6 stages, but the reality is we're always living in each of the stages. It's just how much are we living in which stage, right? And at the top of the show, or earlier I talked about spending time with my mom. With what I meant to say was investing time with my mom. So I wrote the book, and I'm still working on this every day. Every day I screw up, but every day I do something right too. And so I think this is not a journey that ever ends. It's something that we're always kind of cycling back to, and having to revisit certain points. There are specific frameworks in here I know that people find helpful. I use the Eisenhower matrix, which is that idea of the 4 quadrants: what's important and urgent, what's important but not urgent, what's not important, not urgent, and what's urgent but not important. So that's a fundamental way to look at your day. So a lot of people will print out that Eisenhower matrix and they put that up. They put it on their door when they leave their office, or they put it by their computer, so that they're looking and reminding themselves, okay, I have to do what's important. I have to be driven by the top 2 quadrants, the important quadrants, not by the urgent quadrants. So doing little reminders like that, building in systems. And then I think the most powerful leadership practice is reflection.
Mm.
Another thing that, as a new assistant principal, one of the greatest things you can do is get in the habit of Friday afternoon, when the school shuts down, having someone that you go reflect with. In the ideal world, that's your principal. And at the end of the day, the end of the week, assistant principals, instructional coaches, if your leadership team can get together and y'all can reflect on the week, like honestly, openly, what went well, what were the surprises, what will we do differently? If you just work through those 3 questions as a group, how powerful is that? And if you can't
Beautiful.
do it as a team, do it individually. Work through those questions yourself. It's funny
I
because when I
think
do a work, go ahead.
no, I don't want to interrupt you. You can continue.
When we do a workshop now, when I do a workshop, I come home and my wife said, "Oh, what went well? Were there any surprise?" Like she has it down, and so she helps me kind of debrief and work through those things.
I love that practice. Every meeting, a principal or assistant principal leads with another school leader or the teachers. It should always start with something called glows and grows, and you can call it
Mm,
any way you want. What is going well? Always start with the positive, because we are so quick and saying everything is going bad, all this stuff, but there's always something good, because you have to always give yourself some grace and talk about the what is going wrong, what needs to be fixed. That often that list is much longer, but it is when you talk about it, when you reflect about it, is that you can get into that strategic mindset, as you mentioned in your book, instead of like, I have to fix this, I have to fix this,
mm,
without
mhm,
really thinking about why is it going wrong, what I'm doing wrong, am I really doing everything? Like you say, is this a teacher problem? If so, how I'm going to support that teacher, what I'm going to put in place, what I'm going to change. Perhaps that teacher is doing morning duty, and the morning classes are going to help. So remove that morning duty so that teacher can stay more time, right? Those changes doesn't have to be building a monument. It could be putting a pebble in that thing that eventually will be the monument.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is building the pebble, right? That's that idea of that incremental change. And you just gave a great example, right? Instead of doing this massive book study or sending them to a conference or whatever, you look at the root problem, and part of it is they're new, they need more time, and I've got them doing morning duty. Okay, I can change that. I think it's a mindset from moving from trying to fix things to just trying to make it incrementally better as quickly as we can. Just make it a little bit better. And if we take those incremental steps long enough, then things will be at the point where they're at least tolerable, right? And then we can look at the next thing. But yeah, we got to get out of the role of fixing things. Just figure out how can I make this a little bit better?
Beautiful. Love it. So, looking ahead, Frederick, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for school leaders in the next decade and how they can prepare to meet them?
I think the biggest challenge right now is just our teaching core. We've gutted our teaching core. I mean, that's the reality is in many schools, you cannot find a qualified teacher. Where I'm in rural Appalachia, and we're hiring yeah, we're hiring people that can't teach. And it's not their fault. They were never trained, but they're just stepping into classrooms because there is nobody else. That is the biggest challenge. And I think at the same time, that's why this book is more important than ever, because we have people coming into schools. It's not an option to help your new teachers or your early career teachers become better teachers. That's not an option. If you don't help them grow, you're just going to continue cycling through, because you can't come from being a police officer to stepping in a classroom and being a high school math teacher without help. It's not going to work. And if we can't get better at focusing our organization, the whole school organization, focusing it on growing teachers, and if we can't get better ourselves about coaching and helping teachers grow, then I don't know what we do, because you can't run a school, you can't help kids without teachers.
It is a huge situation in both rural and urban settings. The truth is that we live in a country that is not valuing education right now the way it should be, and we hope that changes in the near future.
Yeah.
Frederick, as I finish your book, and I read it twice because I had the fortune to read it before it was published, um, I can see there's another book coming. What is Frederick's plan for following this work?
Mm. So the next book is about when I have that time, right? When I can invest more in my building on how I align my systems, how to align systems for teacher growth. So that's the next book. We talked about Jim Collins earlier. I have a whole concept called the flywheel, right? And the flywheel is that teachers get professional development, and then we follow up professional development with some kind of observation about what happened, right? What's the result of your professional development? And then based on the data we collect in that observation, we, leadership, but also the teacher, think about what's the next step. And so you wind up with this cycle. I'm a teacher. I know I need to get better at X. So I do professional development. You come in and follow up and look at the data and see, did I actually implement? If I didn't implement, then you help me to implement the thing that's going to make my teaching better. And if I did implement it, then we talk about, okay, well, what's the next step? What comes after this? And so we create this cycle of growth. We don't just talk about growth mindset, we actually build a system, and we build habits and techniques and processes to be able to drive that system. So that's the second book. And most of the pieces are already written. They're just living in different places. So I think it's a matter for me of making it a priority, right? Because right now I'm focused on other things. I focus on the daily email. I'm focused on the podcast. I'm focused on moving into speaking and developing courses. But I need to be, if I want the second book, I have to be intentional. I have to make that a priority and clear the time to do it. So at some point
Beautiful.
that's
To
going to
invest
happen. I'm
that
not ready
time.
to go there yet.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I think that we all talk about making the difference, and this book absolutely makes the difference. I highly recommend it. A School Leader's Guide to Reclaiming Purpose. Frederick, any last thoughts for the listeners and viewers of the show?
Yeah, I want to thank you, Ephraim. We've known each other, I think, for about a year now, and the beauty of the work that I've been able to do is to meet just incredible human beings. And we just talked about the hard situations in schools facing us. Like, there's no way to sugarcoat the teacher shortage. But what we have power over is how we treat people every day. We choose how we show up to other people, right? And that's the great thing. And I just want to say thank you, because you have always shown up as somebody that's empowering and interested and just a wonderful human being. You helped with the book, you helped review it and provided some amazing suggestions. Like, this book is better because you gave me feedback on it. And so, yeah, my closing words are thank you. You're a great human being. I love being on your show, and I love just our conversations together, even off mic.
Frederick, I appreciate you, man. I can't wait to one day go to Appalachia and go to those hiking expeditions with you.
I would love to do that.
Absolutely. Take care, man. Have a fantastic weekend.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ephraim.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Ephraim Martinez.
Chulo.
And as of that production, chill out.